Great. I'm so happy that you are here. This is just like, what a moment.
I know. I'm so happy to finally connect. It's just amazing. As you
Yes.
know, we've played how many fantasy football games against each other and finally actually able to talk together.
So wonderful. Yes, so I always like to ask the question, how do we know each other?
There we go. I jumped the gun on that one, but
No,
yeah. So I mean,
not
I
at
think
all.
I
You teed
joined.
me up perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. I joined our fantasy football league, and I think it was 2019. So yeah, I guess it's been since then. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And it's funny too. I was thinking about ahead of the time on this show. It's like, gosh, okay, so we know each other through Alicia, who has been on the show twice. And then I was thinking about another thing where I'm gonna go almost immediately next because I wanted to start the conversation this way, who was a conversation with somebody who I also know through Alicia, who was on the show, and we were good friends when we lived in Houston. And it's like the 6 degrees of separation.
I love it. I love it. Or like the one as it's like rapidly getting to across the world with
Yes,
how connected
it's
we all
so
are.
it's really been such a blessing for me. Like I have so many thoughts on social media, and it makes me really nervous with having children, which we can also get there as well. But also just to be able to feel that closeness, the connection. Obviously, like I have my whole entire businesses on my computer, which was a real blessing for me having moved. I literally just plopped my desk here, opened up my laptop, and started seeing clients again yesterday. Like,
And you would never know from looking at that background. My
yeah.
goodness. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you look at the floor, it would be a little different.
As I mean that's like months, especially with kids. I think you get like years of leeway on that one.
I know. And I have this real unrealistic expectation of like, well, by March we'll have this done, or by, like, and it's like, no, I don't know. There are a lot of boxes left. We've gone through a lot,
Yeah.
still have a lot.
Yeah, yeah. That's where I take it. I like to kind of flip it and be just like just one box at a time instead of like putting a deadline on it.
Yes.
It's kind of like how I manage my team as well. I'm like, what's your North Star? Just everything you do gets you incrementally there. So
Yes.
yeah.
I love that. I actually have that conversation with clients a lot too, where it's like the first thing that we talk about is just finding awareness. Like, are you aware of how often you're participating in negative self-talk? Are you aware of how many times you're picking up your vape pen? Because we don't even know where we're going if you don't
Right.
know how often you're doing it. Because, like, sure, your goal might be to never participate in negative self-talk, but we don't know if we don't have somewhere to go. And then making those small, then we think about thinking about doing something.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, I just love that.
Yes,
Yeah. Well,
we're
thank you
just
for our therapy session already. Awesome.
I love it. I love it. But yeah, so I'm so excited to talk to you today. We're talking about single mom by choice.
Yes, yes. So, yeah, I mean, I am a solo mom by choice. It's funny, I used to say single mom and I now say solo because
Okay.
like I actually like I would love to be partnered. Like that's something that is very important to me. And so I kind of love that like flip of it. And I used to say single mom, but now I'm like, no, I'm a solo mom by choice. Like I'm flying solo here from the mom standpoint, but would love to find a partner at some point in the future.
No, I think then language really does matter. Like I remember growing up and thinking like, oh, people being politically correct, that everyone's too sensitive, right? This was well before I became a therapist. Reflection of my Midwestern upbringing, I guess. And I just was like, oh, everyone, like, let's all just relax and have fun. But it is really important. And I am so grateful that you mentioned that, because there's a difference between single parenting, as in I'm single by choice and choose to parent alone and have no couple dumb, right? Versus I chose to have a baby by myself, and now let's see where the romance goes.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And it's funny because and we can get all into this as well, like the language
Yes.
thing, especially having a donor conceived child is
Uh-huh.
really interesting. Like, what
Sure.
does father mean? What does dad mean? What does
Sure.
donor mean?
Yes.
And I've come to I'll like jump on that one. So I've come to like I'm very intentional of like referring to my daughter's biological father as her donor.
Mhm.
But that said, like it's very important to me that she chooses her own words as well of like what that means for her in the future. So I don't want to over prescribe that, especially because there's so many societal beliefs and understanding of what a father or a dad is, and she doesn't have that in a physical presence sense. And
Mhm.
so yes, that's one thing too that's like really important to me with her is just like to enable that language to come as is and as she develops and for whatever she wants to use to explain her genetics.
Right. Well, I love that too, because what you're describing is like kind of maybe neutral's not the word, but like donor conceived, donor is kind of the neutral. So then if she wants to start calling him dad, she can. If she wants to call him, but there's just like there's no you know, what is the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a total blank this morning. There's no like preconceived notion or
Exactly,
judgment on
exactly.
it.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. And that's a lot of like my philosophy around, this choice to be a solo parent and in giving her as many opportunities as possible. So when it comes to connecting to half siblings, we already have 10 half siblings that we know of from
Oh
her
my gosh.
donor. And
I,
so
my arms are covered. You can't see. That's so wild. I love
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so with that, I mean, that's one thing that I just want to avoid that was part of the foundation for me was just making sure that I'm not taking away any option for her,
Yes.
that I'm opening all of those doors. If she wants to connect in the future, amazing. If she doesn't, no problem. At least like the opportunity is there.
I mean, 10, that's so fantastic. And like you said, having the option there, interesting. Is there, for your specific case, and I don't know if you have much, like how much you want to educate the listener on it, but like the option to have the donor meet the children, like, is that something that is even an option? Do donors get to say yes or no? You get to say yes or no. What does that look like?
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump into the tactics on this one. I've recently become much more educated on the gamete donor industry.
Uh-huh.
And I admit I am not that jazzed, given it is a highly unregulated for-profit industry.
Uh-huh.
And so that can be probably like, an hours and hours long podcast in that regard. But there are many people who are out there and advocating and doing some really great work that I'm happy to share resources for people who are interested
Please,
in learning more.
we will put
Um,
those in show notes for
I
sure.
will, I will for sure. But yeah, so it's interesting as far as having those siblings and kind of going down that route. And so I went through a very large cryobank. And so with that, I'm lucky in that like they do have a sibling registry. And so once, I reported a pregnancy and I then, reported when my daughter, Josie was born. And through that, I got connected with the other reported siblings.
Mhm.
And so technically, because, I was very intentional in choosing a donor who was open identification. And so similarly, I didn't want to take that option away from Josie in the future. And so I did make sure that was very important for me in donor selection, that it wasn't an anonymous donor. And that's another one. There's like all kinds of future issues and not issues, but it really limits a donor conceived child for how they view themselves and the opportunities that they have. And, they have someone who's half of their genetics who, if they don't have an option to connect with, or if they find them through like 23andMe later in life and they don't want to have a relationship,
Mhm.
like that's really, really hard. And so I wanted to make sure that, we had those options. And so it is at 18. When Josie turns 18, my daughter turns 18 is when she'll have the option to at least get the donor's contact information and reach out if that contact information is even valid, if it's still accurate. I mean, there's all kinds of like the ifs and asterisks, associated with that. But it has been really great to connect with this sibling pod. And so it's really fun. We have a Facebook group and everybody just like shares pictures and like, oh my gosh, like they have the same eye color and like, oh, those mannerisms. And so that's really special. Just to have that like support of others
Oh
who,
my
I
gosh.
mean, especially because we are family in my mind, like it is an extension of family. It was a little jarring at first. And I was like, oh my gosh, we already have half siblings, but it has just really like blown open my mind as to like how special to have such a cool extended family from our little tiny family of, me, Josie, and the pup. And of course,
Yeah.
our massive support network of, my parents are just so amazing and so involved. But yeah, so no contact with the donor, but
Right.
contact with other families who have, who were recipient parents of that donor. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I was absolutely like 23andMe, Ancestry.com was absolutely on my list of questions in my mind. It's like, how to prepare children for, hey, one day if you take this test when you're, 25, 32, whenever you decide to do it, the
Yeah.
surprise that might come. And so that's really lovely, that the idea that Josie's just like, oh no, I've already got 10, bring them on. Who else you got?
Exactly.
Show me everybody else.
Yeah. And also, I mean, that's part of how I like this is part of our family. This is our reality. And and that's something when you look back at the donor conceived industry, like a lot of times it was a secret. And so, there's a kind of like a little bit of a morbid joke of like it's sibling season because everybody gets DNA tests for Christmas. And so you have this, like, for those who have,
Yes.
some, larger pods and larger donations, like, it's like, okay, like, who are we going to meet this season? And so that it's a little sad because oftentimes it is a surprise. And so that's one thing that's so important to me is that it's not. So, I mean, from the time she was a bitty babe, we were already reading books about, her solo mom and like what our journey was. And we talk about it regularly. And so as she gets older, so right now she's 7 months. Actually, today, she's 7 months old today. Um, so that's just going to be part of our family story and something that we talk very openly about. Like there's nothing to be ashamed in it. There's nothing to there's a ton of joy in it, quite frankly, of like how special to have, these additional siblings, and hopefully we'll get to meet each other. They're all over the place. So no one
No.
like local, but we'll figure that out for sure as far as how those relationships develop and what she wants those relationships to be.
Right. Right. And of course, like that's the option too. Like we want to know nothing about anybody at all. But of course, obviously we do know now with the DNA tests that are out there, they might. And so you feel like in your situation, you're just setting her up for the most success by being open about it in the beginning. I think about there's an episode of Parks and Rec where Jerry finds out he's adopted, which if you haven't seen Parks and Rec, go see it. You have no idea what I'm talking
Oh my
about.
God, it's fantastic.
It's so great. You gotta, no tea, no shade. You gotta make it through the first season. This first season's rough, but then it gets
Yeah.
spectacular. But I just remembered thinking like, oh my gosh, that would be such a wild thing. And so many things are happening with DNA these days. So to be able to just say like, hey, this is what's happening, and bless, oh my gosh, I just had somebody from Kind Cotton on the pod. By the time this drops, it will already have dropped, and that's their goal, is to give out um diverse children's books. Not everyone is white, not everyone has the same religion, not everyone
Yeah.
has a mom and a dad, and it's so exciting that there are books out there that are like, hi, you are a child who was brought into this world through a donor conceive. Like that's wonderful. And it's just
Yeah.
really normalizing and it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are many other ways to become a solo mom or solo parent. We have solo dads as well. And so so with that, I do love that, of like love makes a family is like one of my favorites, of just like,
Yeah.
it's so true. And like every page is a different type of family. Whether it is, living with extended family, whether it's two moms, two dads, a mom and a dad, a solo parent, being raised by grandparents, there's all kinds of different families represented there, and something that and I'll take all those book recommendations as well because I'm trying
Yes.
to build up that library as much as I can too.
Yes. Well, everyone jump over into my DM, send us all those books that you know, because I'd love to know it too. I think it's important not only for the children who are in that situation, but for everyone else. Like that was another conversation I had with Caitlin, was like, white kids with a mom and a dad need to understand that people have different religions and different relationships. Like I want my kids to grow up seeing other people and being normalized in that everyone's life is beautiful, and that
Yep.
their choices and beliefs and who they are as a person is important. And so
Yeah.
that's just a really beautiful thing to be able to
Yeah.
express that. And yeah, like you're saying, even at 7 months, you're like, we have the books, we're talking about it.
Exactly. And even just like our little conversations, like, I talked to her when I was still pregnant with her as to, what this journey was. And it was funny. I wrote a letter to her in my journal on the day that I had my embryo transfer for her. And it was just like so fun to look back on that, of just, and I reflected on a lot of that too, of just like how important she is to me and how we have a different type of family from the traditional, as you noted, like mom, dad, 2.5 kids, one, a dog and a dog. We do have, a dog as well. So at least we're like checking that box. But it's a different path to motherhood, but something that now, being 7 months in, I'm like, my gosh, like I was made to be a mom. And like this is just like I just love it. And it is so the path for me. And I'm so thankful science to have enabled that. And so that's one thing that is just like really, really special to be able to be a mom, especially with, you know, I am 41 now. And so, that biological clock's a ticking. And so as noted, like I would love to still meet someone, but I'm just like so full of gratitude for this life that we're building.
Yeah, I'm curious. Well, this is so. Sorry. I was like, I just stopped myself because I was like, I'm going to go here, but I want to go there first.
Yeah.
So, not that anybody knows, but I just said it out loud. So, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about like what was it you mentioned the biological clock, which we all is
Yeah.
unfortunately a very real thing on the uterus side. Like, what was the thing that got you to the point that was like, this is, and obviously now you're like, I was made to be a mom. You had that urge, that calling that was like, I don't need a partner. I need a child. Like, what can you walk us through kind of how that all went for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, it was, I mean, like it was such a journey. Like it was not just like I woke up one day and was like, I'm gonna have my own kids. And that's one thing too, is like honestly, and this is another thing from a resource standpoint, like anybody else who's considering this path, like there's such a community out there. And
Mm,
so you're not forging this path alone. So I ended up through the single greatest choice. So I'm now very good friends with Katie Bryan, who leads that podcast and is building a coaching and consulting business around it, which is just fantastic. And so she started these community groups. And so we have a group. It was 10 of us, including Katie, who are part of that first group. And we still get together once a month on Zoom. And of Katie already has a kid as a solo mom by choice. And the rest of us, of the 9 of us, I think there are 5 or 6 kids now. And like we just met a year and a half ago. And so it's just like amazing to see this like community of solo moms blossoming and like we're there to support each other. And so that's the thing is there's like amazing communities out there too, that you're not like forging this path alone. And that was so helpful to talk through things of like, how do you tell extended family if they aren't as accepting of this path? Or, what do people say? Like, oh, you just couldn't meet the right guy. I did have a nurse say that to me while I was going through IVF. And I was like, who are
I feel
you?
so
Like, what?
entitled. Oh, we're gonna go there.
Oh, but anyway, so I mean, one dimension of this choice is yes, I hadn't met the right guy. And that's one thing, like I wasn't willing to settle. I
Yes,
felt this like desperation in dating, in all honesty, to find the one because I wanted to have kids.
yes,
And ultimately they're two separate things. Like there is a romantic relationship and like honestly, having Josie now, it creates a very different filter, quite frankly, of
yes.
like I'm not going to settle at all because like to have someone actually like meet my daughter, like oh you better be like cream of the crop. So there is
Uh-huh.
a much higher bar now for who I would want to even bring into our lives, which I think
Of
is like why didn't I have
course.
that bar before? It's like kind of funny, but
Okay, I love that. If we could just, I want to pick on
yeah,
that just a minute too, because why didn't I have that bar before? And I think like, let's say it again for the people in the back. Like, why do we not hold ourselves to that higher standard and the expectations of how people are going to be in our lives? And it's so beautiful for you having the hindsight to be able to share that with people of like, there are options out there, even if it's not your white picket fence, get married, walk down the aisle, then have 2.5 kids and a dog. It doesn't matter because what you're
yeah.
doing is taking care of yourself. And having a baby does not make a relationship easier. I know this
No,
is brand new information for everybody. And like, you're welcome that I've told you. Like, if you were already not doing great with the person, having a baby is not the thing that's going to fix it. And so for you, I really sorry. I get so excited when you give this information to people to feel empowered of like, baby,
totally.
don't settle. Don't do
Yep.
it.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And I will go back to like my journey of how I got here. But even now, like being like now actually parenting,
Yes.
like there are some things that are harder, like to shovel my sidewalk. I have her strapped in a carrier with a big coat on with a shovel, but it's great. We have a blast. Like she
Sure.
just loves it. So,
Sure.
it's like you figure
Sure.
that stuff out.
Yeah.
And there are times where like I'm exhausted or I need to work late and then I have to like pay my nanny to stay later and like all these things. And so those things are harder, but there's a lot that's easier too.
Yeah.
So it's both sides. Like some things are harder, some things are easier. Like there's no negotiation. There's no additional like, if something goes wrong, it's on me. Like,
Yeah.
like, nope, that was me. I did that. Like, oh yeah, she rolled off the bed the other day. That was me. That was me. Like, she's fine, totally fine. Like, I find that it's like a rite of passage, like a milestone of like, oh, yep, kid rolled off the bed or off the
Oh yeah.
couch or whatever it may be. Um,
Or you bang their head on the car frame trying to
uh-huh.
pretend to get out of the car seat. That's definitely a rite of passage.
Totally,
My daughter a
totally. Like
couple of days
snap
ago.
their fingers into a buckle. Oh yeah, all the things.
Yes, yes. I did it with my daughter a couple of days ago, and luckily she didn't even respond. And I was just like, "Oh my gosh, pay attention, Meg, pay attention.
I
Okay, we're
know,
gonna make
I
changes
know.
moving forward."
Exactly. Or like one more funny one. My first appointment for Josie at the pediatrician, they were like, okay, so when you cut her nails, you will cut her finger. Don't call us. Don't call us.
Don't
Put
call
pressure
us.
on it for 20 minutes, not 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Don't check it halfway through. Don't call us. I was like, oh, so you get this from every parent.
From
It was
every
really
parent.
funny.
Yes,
Don't call us.
yes,
But
yes. Oh
anyway,
my
this
gosh.
path. So I thought about freezing my eggs. And I used to say, like, I'm a faithful person. And so I used to say, oh, God has a path for me. Like he'll point me in that direction. And so, like, I'll meet someone, this will happen.
Sure.
And so I had thought about freezing my eggs right like at the beginning of 2020. We
Mhm.
know what happened there. I was living in New York City at the time. I ended up quarantining with my parents in outside of Philadelphia because my dad is super high risk. So
Right.
we decided as a family that it was better for all of us to be together as opposed to not see each other for who knows how long. And so it was a fascinating social experiment.
Mhm.
I will just say that as a, very independent professional woman. We have a very close relationship. I'm super, super thankful for that. But there were ups and downs in that. But so through that, I eventually I was like, okay, you know what? I need to think about this. A doctor had mentioned to me, who's a very dear family friend, had mentioned to me, like, hey, have you thought about having kids on your own? I was like, oh, no, no, no. Like, I'm going to meet someone. And so she primed the seed. She's an OB/GYN. I reached out to her. I said, like, what fertility doctors do you know? She pointed me to a local one in the area who actually interned for her, which was funny. So they know each other well. And I sat down with him our first day and he said, look, if you were 28, we'd be having a very different conversation, but you're 38. And we don't even know if you can make a healthy embryo. He's like,
Mhm.
so I don't want you to spend the equivalent of a college education potentially like
Yes,
storing eggs
yes.
if they're not viable. So he's like,
Right.
if you would ever consider having your own kids, he's like, I recommend actually getting a donor and we'll make the embryos.
Mhm.
And then you can decide in the future. And then we know, definitively, like if your eggs are healthy enough and you can actually make healthy embryos, because even something that looks like a healthy, and so it was, and I'm an engineer. As you can probably tell from some of my fact-based data already, but
Yes, yes.
so I was like, okay, good. Like I needed this like science piece of it to figure this out. And that really set me on the path of like, what would this look like? And so I started looking into more resources. I read some books. I, started reaching out to people on Instagram. And that became a little bit of an easier decision because it was like, well, I'm not having a kid yet. It was like, I'm preserving that option for the future.
Right.
But then I shared this very openly with many, many friends that I was considering this path. And I had a friend reach out to me and she said, like, hey, I found this podcast. And it was the single greatest choice that I had mentioned earlier. And I binged the entire podcast and was like, oh my God, I'm ready.
Mhm.
It was like that confirmation of this community that I mentioned previously that I was like, okay, it's time. Like, I just so want to have a kid. I'm not alone in this. Like, there's an amazing community out there. And I
Mhm.
and I have amazing support like outside of the solo moms community, but it is nice to not be like the only one
Right.
and to have that like additional support of people who are going through a similar experience.
Sure.
So yeah, that was July of 2022 that I was like, I am ready. And so
Yeah.
I ended up having my transfer in October. I was very, very lucky that, I had a lot of, some healthy embryos and it worked on the first try. I was like so thankful for that. And yeah, Josie was born in July of 2023. So that's kind of like the path. It was very, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, it was really like, okay, like what's the next step? What's the next step to get more information? What's the next step to figure out if this is a path for me? Who else do I want to talk to? And so it was really just almost like chipping away
Mhm.
of what additional information do I need and there was just that moment where I was like, oh, I'm ready. Okay, it's time. It's time. And so, yeah, now I have a beautiful 7-month-old daughter.
Yes, and that's so, I mean, I just really appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people, like we talked about earlier, they're like, well, I have to be married, or I can't do it alone, or all of the myriad of things. But like you're saying, like you just keep asking the questions that lead you to, which is honestly a lot of my therapy style, is like, I
Exactly.
just keep asking you questions, and you get to a space where you have brought yourself
Right.
to where you realize where your goals are and where you want to be, versus just
Exactly.
like plop here.
Yep. Yep. Totally. Totally.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I was curious. So we talked a little earlier about, and I use the word entitled. People feel really entitled. I have had my own fertility struggles. I am deeply involved in that community. I was on the Casey Fertility Moms group when I was living in Kansas City, but a few days ago, I'm still on it as well. But and I even had a fellow who was on the podcast. Gosh, I keep referencing my own podcast of late, and I just hate that. But it's just
But those are your conversations and they're
my
so important
conversation.
because you learn so much in it. So I totally get it. It's
Yes.
amazing.
So I had Steve Miller on, and he, not the singer, and he was talking about, like, when people feel so entitled to come up and ask questions, like, "When are you having children?" And that was the big one, and he was like, "I'm gonna have a jar out, and every time somebody asks me that, they have to put in $5, and that's gonna help me pay for my IVF."
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I was like, "Absolutely," because people feel so entitled to be able to ask these questions, and where I was referencing earlier with Jenny Gordon, who is on, or Jenny Hughes, excuse me. She's a trauma therapist. And even I had said this to her, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do it. It's so hard. Like, I don't know how you listen to that day in and day out. And she told me separately and also on the show, she was like, yeah, you've said that to me before. It makes you feel really othered, like really. And I was just curious if people kind of feel entitled. Obviously, we want you to feel supported and like, wow, you are amazing. But do people have those kind of conversations with you where they say some things like, oh my gosh, I could never do it alone, or I could never, like, how did those conversations go for you? Because like I said, in the fertility, in the global umbrella of fertility and all that involves solo parenting, IVF, IUI, everything,
Yeah.
people just feel really entitled to
Yeah.
some
Well,
things.
and there's two sides of that. One is I approach this very open.
Mhm.
And so I was very open about what I was going through with everybody. And so it was never, and not everyone. I mean, like, I have boundaries as far as like who I'm going to be vulnerable with.
Right.
But it was, I was pretty open with most people who know me on a personal level.
Mhm.
And that really helped because like there were no questions.
Mhm.
So like I wasn't caught off guard because those who are in my circle
Mhm.
already knew. And it was
Right.
great because I also had them to therefore reach out to for support.
Mhm.
Um, but when it's funny. I have like, a couple like, WhatsApp groups of really good friends. People are like, oh my gosh, like I'm solo parenting this weekend. I'm like, oh, that's funny. Like I just kind of have like a little chuckle in my head because, and a coworker did it just yesterday, actually. He and I were catching up. He's like, well, I'm a solo parent this week. He's like, but you do that all the time. It was like such a point of like empathy from him that I was like, oh, you're so sweet. But it's very different because it's just like with that specific question, like I could never do it alone. It's like, no, you could, you figure it out. And so I just respond in a way that's like, if I don't want to engage in the conversation or I find it appropriate, I just shut it down. Like I have some like very clear boundaries,
Love
especially
it.
now that Josie's here. Like
Yes.
I'm like, no, I don't have time for that. So like if you're gonna be a jerk about it or make some like bad comments, which by the way, I haven't gotten a single negative comment this entire journey.
Thank
And I
goodness.
think it's
Yeah.
because I have been so open about it. I know there are some people, potentially some of my parents' friends and things like that, like generationally, who were a bit surprised by the path at first and kind of like wrapping their head around it.
Mhm.
But they've been nothing but supportive. I mean, that's one thing where when I moved back to Pennsylvania in COVID, I ended up
Mhm.
buying a house 10 minutes from my parents because I decided to go on this
Yeah.
journey and I knew that I would need support. And so I'm
Sure.
so, so blessed to have their support. And that's the other thing is like, I could never do it alone. Like I'm not doing it alone
Mhm.
because I have my parents here. I have other family here. I have this like, I call them family. It's like my parents' friends. I grew up with them, like this,
Yeah.
this, this little girl, how lucky she is, like 10,000 aunts and uncles kind of running around the area. And so it's not alone. It's just different.
Mhm.
And so it does take like the one thing that has gotten me a little bit is like financially.
Mhm.
Like there is no backup. So
Yes.
like that's the one thing for me that's like, okay, like I, that I kind of, go back on when people kind of mention like going, doing it alone or whatever. Or that is one thing that I'm just like pretty intentional financially, just
Of course.
because I know that if something, if I were to, not be able to work for some amount of time, like I don't have a dual income. And I know a lot of people don't either. And so
Right.
but that's one thing, like there is no other person to kind of rely on. And so I do want to make sure that we're at least like financially set up for as much success as possible because
Mhm.
of that, kind of lack of backup.
Yes. I thank you so much for sharing that. And I just, again, it's so beautiful to have that community. I did a lot of solo parenting in Kansas City when my husband traveled,
Yeah.
but again, always had like knew he was coming back and would be like getting to hand off, and sometimes would even be really intentional about like, okay, and now I'm just going to take the night and go to drag bingo with my girlfriend or something. And I was just curious how you are intentional about taking that mental health time for yourself, that restorative time. I talk so much with parents, especially my stay-at-home parents, but all of them is like there's just still, as much as it's 2024 and we're moving forward and we're progressive and we're not filling from an empty cup, there is also this thing that we grew up with of like you're a parent and that's your number one job and that's the only thing you do, and 99% of that time has to go to your kid. I was just curious, like what is the self-talk like for that? What is the thing that you do? Kind of maybe some tips that you might have for other people, either who are solo parenting or consider.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm like laughing with you asking that question because I realize like I honestly haven't taken a ton of time away from Josie.
Sure.
I went out to one dinner with a girlfriend a couple weeks ago, or like 2 weekends ago, which was like great and so much fun.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I really just like love hanging out with her. So,
I was gonna
I'd
say,
say, so it's so funny because I think I came into it just like so grounded. Like I meditated almost every single day for now. I find my mindful moments now. I like haven't been like on my like, consistent 10 minutes a day since having Josie, but I
sure.
meditated almost every single day for a year and a half leading up to
Mm,
her birth. And I
mm,
came into it just so grounded. And now I take like that practice into like my daily moments. But I
yeah.
think with that, like, oh my gosh, I just find such joy in like every little moment. And
Yes.
so like, and it's that mindset. I would say it is like that self-talk that I have is much more like in the positive directions. Like I'm just the other day, we were driving, it was a 3-hour drive to upstate New York. And Josie was screaming in the car and there's nobody in the back seat. Like it's me and her in the car. So like nobody can plug back in her pacifier. And I actually teared up because I was
Sure.
like, oh, I'm going to miss this someday. It
Yeah.
wasn't because she was upset. It was literally because I was like, oh my gosh, like, and it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I got like so emotional in the moment just because I was like, I know she's safe. She's fine. Like,
Babies
yeah,
cry. Y'all,
babies
listener, babies
cry.
cry. Okay.
Exactly. And it's like she'll figure it out and she cried herself to sleep like in 10 minutes and so it was fine. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't pleasant, don't get me wrong, but there was a little bit of me that was just it was just like this bizarre moment of like self-talk of like I'm going to miss this someday. And like I was like, "Oh my God, I'm crying for very different reasons than my daughter who's screaming in the back seat." But here we are just like, little CRV popping down the turnpike with everybody
Yes.
crying in the car. But it was
What a visual.
yeah, I know. I know.
But
But
I
now
love that though. That's like, and that's the thing. Honestly, when I was asking, I was like, she is 7 months. I do wonder if it's still in that space where you are. And I've had clients who my question is always like, how are you taking care of yourself?
right.
When are you recharging that battery? And I have had clients who just genuinely are like, uh, being a parent recharges my battery. And
It
yes,
does.
things
That's
are hard,
a
but
great way to
I
put it. Yeah.
want to spend every
Yeah.
moment. And I just want to be really clear that like every person's journey is different. So what you're saying,
100%.
absolutely. For other
Totally.
people, when you do need that time away,
Right.
wonderful as well. And
Yep.
everything in between.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, and also, I mean, and this is where like every kid is different too. And like Josie has been a pretty decent nighttime sleeper.
Mhm.
So I do have like a couple hours in the evening too. Like after she goes to bed around like 7 or 7:30. And so I have a couple hours to like, cook or clean or watch a show. And so like, that's a little bit of like that me time for sure. And
Yeah.
I have a 5-day work trip coming up next week that I'm like, oh my God, I really don't want to go. Like, it's part of my job. I'm shocked that I've made it until she's 7 months without having to
I
travel.
was gonna say
Yeah,
that's impressive.
yeah. So I work remotely for I live in Pennsylvania, but I work remotely for a company in California. And
Welcome.
so yeah, it's time. It's time. But then I do also, I guess I'm saving up that time. Like I have 2 trips coming up, like 2 weekend trips. One is like a grad school reunion that I'm hoping to attend in April. And then a couple friends are, many friends are turning 40 these days, 40 these days. And so we're doing a little trip to Mexico in September. So like I have like a couple of these like pockets of, like weekends away, and thank God for Josie's grandparents who
Yes.
are, very, so wonderful to be able to lean on them for childcare to get those
Yes.
away.
And
Mhm.
like you said, the community piece of it is so helpful. And
Yeah.
sorry, I feel like we're kind of jumping around a lot, but I feel
I
like
know.
it's just such a good flow of conversation is what I'm tracking fine.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
But yeah, because I was just like, so first of all, I just wanted to make a comment because you had talked earlier about some of like the elder statesmen and the generationals before us. And like, there was actually an episode of The Golden Girls where Blanche's daughter comes and tells her, and she makes really, I mean, it would be handled differently, I think, if it were written today, but the energy was still there and it was good.
Yeah.
Like she was saying, like, no, that's not okay. What are you doing? Da, 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 da. And then they actually bring the baby in like the next season, and they show her evolution of her thought process on it, and she still has these struggles and everything. And that was in the 80s. And so it's just nice to see that we are coming along. Obviously people our generation are like, do you boo what?
Right.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
it is that kind of
Exactly.
conversation. And I love you've been so consistent today in talking about being open and sharing. And I do of course acknowledge for everybody, like, this is, sorry, I keep bringing it back to therapy, but like this is the same thing I say about therapy. Like there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's nobody's business. And
Right.
so there's nothing that I hope everyone feels empowered to share their truth in their most honest and natural way, but boundaried, because not everyone deserves to know
Totally.
your truth. And for
100%.
you've been able to express that, like just being so open about it has just really made it, dare I say, easier,
Absolutely.
or maybe
Yeah.
smoother is probably a better word, like smoother.
And I feel like because I've been open about it and shared along the way, I've also therefore educated those with me, which has been really helpful. So even like, we mentioned social media. It's like my little post about like when I was, sharing that I was expecting Josie and having a kid on my own. I lead the witness intentionally. So I say, I am so appreciative of all the love and support that I've received so far on this journey. So
Yes.
like, don't you dare share anything but that. Thank
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
you. So I
Yes.
also use those tactics as well of like with some intention of like, here's what I expect. Like, this isn't a time to question this. Like, and happy to have like an educated conversation about it. But with that, I mean, yeah, I haven't had any of it, like luckily any of like negative pushback or comments or anything like that, which has been just wonderful.
Yeah.
But I love that, like, yes, there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's also nobody's business. Like, I think that
I
that's so spot on as well, and really enables those clear boundaries to be set when they need to be. Like,
love boundaries. I
yeah,
just love them so much. And it's not the same thing as like a punitive system, or like, you asked me this question, I'm never talking to you ever again, but also saying, because it's not also, I love that you have educated so many people along the way, and it's also not your job to do that. And so it's
right,
up to you to decide what like mental, emotional labor that you're willing to share with the world. And it is very helpful for people to have that
yeah,
awareness. And again, I think the more open-minded we can all be about everything, about letting people
mhm,
live their authentic lives how they want to, I think the less stress we incur ourselves as well. Like if you're not getting
totally,
upset about Lindsay solo parenting,
exactly,
you have so much more space for other things.
totally, 100%, exactly. I love that perspective too.
Yeah, I think about it, oh, especially, I don't want to be disparaging of the entire state of Texas. There are many people here who are doing a lot of great work, but I do think that it fits the stereotype in certain ways. And especially being in Texas now, I just think about it all the time. Like,
Mhm.
wouldn't it be amazing if people just didn't, I don't want to say didn't care, like don't, but like
Right,
didn't care what I was doing? Do you care that I have tattoos all over my arm? Does it bother you in any way? Then why do you care? Do you
Exactly.
care? We could go on and we could go off on a whole other tangent, but I think that's a good
100%.
energy to take when you have these conversations. Anybody who's listening who has no intention of doing solo parenting, but you just wanted to hear Lindsay and Meg have a conversation, or maybe you were listening because you know somebody and you wanted more information. I'm so glad you're here, and just really having that open spirit and energy for people, and feeling like you can ask questions as long as the goal is non-judgmental. Like we talked, that's how I'm going to end my show, is be curious, not judgmental.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. And that's where like I love having that conversation. Like I love when people come up and say, like, can I ask you questions about it? I'm like, absolutely.
Mhm.
Like, yeah. And even if it's like a flip of a question of like, I had somebody the other day be like, so who's her dad? And I was like, well, she has a donor. Like we don't use the word dad
Right.
because like she doesn't have that person present in her life. And so, but and like exactly as I said earlier, like I'll actually walk them down. They're like, oh, thank you. It's like, it's not like, I can't believe you said dad. Like, it's not that at all. It's like you
Right.
put yourself of like, where are they coming from? Like, this is a great opportunity to connect as
Right.
opposed to shut it down. And that's one thing, like, I just live my life for connection.
Yes.
And whether it is like in my day-to-day life, in my work, like I tell everybody who works for me, I'm like, I care more about you as a person. I won't say the rest of the comment. I swear I care about my company, but like,
Yeah.
I care much more about like the individuals and those connections and those personal relationships. And so like, that's why we're here. So, when there are those questions are asked, even if they it's not malintent. Like just because
Right.
someone doesn't understand that like a
Right.
question may have a negative connotation or like may, elicit some feelings or emotions in another person, like it's not, they didn't come out to like make you sad, like make you upset. Like, so I think looking at it from that perspective too is important, that
Yes.
like positive intent framing.
Oh, I'm gonna get the quote, and I think it's F. Scott Fitzgerald. Somebody help me if I'm wrong. I think it's F. Scott Fitzgerald who was like, I have a habit of assuming people want the best for me. And it's much more elegant than that because he's a much more elegant speaker and
I
writer than I,
love
but
that.
or it was. But just like I like the idea of like, if you have a problem with me, I'm gonna expect you to be an adult and bring it to me. Otherwise, I'm gonna assume that we're good because
Exactly.
I don't walk around with malintent. If I make a mistake, I'm certainly gonna hold myself accountable to that,
100%.
but
Yeah.
making sure that we're in that kind of energy. And I think the more that people can do that as well, the better. And I love what you're describing with work, which could be a whole other podcast episode. I'll
Yeah.
have to have you back talking about the difference. And maybe it sounds, cheesy or whatever, but I think if you have a boss that shows that they're genuinely interested in you in person and they understand that your life is more important than the work that you're doing, they're going to just naturally be more motivated to do the good work for you
Exactly.
versus I can't say my boss, they don't care about me, so I'm going to sneak off and go see a movie in the middle of the day or play golf or
Right.
whatever it might
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
lie about being somewhere versus like, hey, my kid's in a play and I really need to see it, and I'm just going to be
Right.
off out of pocket for 2 hours. Like,
100%. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And happy people do great work. So
happy people do great work. I
yeah.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that. So I didn't prep you
Yeah.
for this question. So if you don't have any and the answer is no, that's great. But I was wondering if you have any like misconceptions or stereotypes about solo parenting that you have heard that you like would love to take the time to dispel.
Um, I mean, I think it's mostly just like the one that we kind of started with of like, oh, you just couldn't find a guy,
Mhm.
and that's one that, I've spent a lot of time talking with, those in my like solo mom network, um, about of like, you know, it's almost like that perspective. And I would say it's honestly like in these conversations, it seems much more like internal dialogue as opposed to like external perception. It's like this like fear of like, what will other people think?
Mhm.
Like, oh, people will think that I couldn't find the right guy, that
Right.
I'm not lovable,
Right.
that I, am not capable of a connection or like whatever it may be. And like very much not the case.
Mhm.
And so, but I think that like I've never heard that from anyone else, like towards me. I've
Yeah.
only heard like those self-talk tracks.
Mhm, mhm,
And that's one thing that we've talked a lot about kind of within this community group too, of like, what does that mean to
mhm.
us? And like what are our own self-perceptions that we need to get over in order to make this like the plan A,
Mhm.
not plan B. And this is
Right.
like 100% my plan A. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, we talked about not settling, which I think is the biggest thing.
Mhm.
It's not that I couldn't find a man. What a very
Yeah,
old, retro way of thinking it. It's that I didn't want to settle for the people who were around me. I mean, no tea, no shade
exactly.
to the guys you've dated before, or maybe some tea and a lot of shade. Who knows? But right. And I do really want to encourage people too. I feel compelled to say, because I've had my own experiences, just because a person works in a perinatal space does not mean that they're going to have an excellent bedside manner. So if somebody says something to you, like I had an OB tell me once that I wasn't all that pregnant when I had a pregnancy loss. And I was like, so we're done. Like, we're done. I like, is that
God.
supposed to make me feel better? Like, so I just want everyone out
Oh,
there to hear, like the nurse who tells you like, oh, okay, well, we're doing this because you couldn't find a man.
right,
Like,
right.
just
Yep.
because somebody is in the field does not mean that they're like, please don't allow their words to carry enough weight to like, don't hold on to that and bring it with you, because
Right,
Shirley
right.
was pregnant and Shirley was excited and Shirley had been trying
Right.
for a while, and
Right,
I'm still allowed to
exactly.
be
And
devastated.
like, and that's one thing. So I actually, when I first got pregnant with Josie, the embryo did split.
Mm,
And so initially I spent 10 days thinking I was pregnant with twins, which now that I have one, I'm like, oh my goodness, like that would have been a lot. But
mm,
I spent 10 days with this just like open heart of like, okay, this is going to be really hard. What is this going to look like? And then I found out that it wasn't. And it spent me a long time. It took me like months to actually reconnect to the pregnancy. And it was so bizarre to live in this moment of like such joy for this little embryo that has like hung on this like, and so there was a strong heartbeat for Josie, but then there is a, empty sac.
mm,
And so that it took me a long time to actually like reconnect to the pregnancy of like, and being able to like reconcile that like
mm,
grief with that like joy and excitement and like have those in the same space. It was very interesting as far as like, and very hard at times. And like, there were times where I'd be joyful and like, is it okay to be joyful? But like, it's not like there's this, one that isn't going to be, and what does that look like? And so I had my doctor was so sweet. She it was a within the same practice, but a different doctor had called me that day, and I just like burst into tears. My house also flooded that day. Like it was
excellent.
this like day of like, are you kidding me? Like that, yeah. And she was so sweet. She spent like 20 or 30 minutes on the phone with me, and she said something which sounds a little similar, but like it was very like empathetic. She's like, look, I don't want you to think of it as a loss because it could have been you're on all these hormones because it was IVF. It could have been a sac of fluid, like all these things.
Mm,
And it was, I found it to be supportive. Like I didn't view it that, but I was in a good enough spot and grounded enough to say, but it was an emotional loss.
that's exactly right.
So it was this like difference of like, sure, doctor, science, whatever, that's where like we flip from science. I like immediately flip from like science to emotional of
Turn
like,
your
but
back.
it was real for me. So it
Yes.
doesn't matter what you say. Like it is still like that emotion tied to it.
Well,
But I am
I
so sorry that doctor said that to you. I cannot even believe that.
I
Oh
just really
my God.
tried to use this platform to let people know, like, just because, and I had a doc. So if you don't mind me saying, my daughter was a twin. I used Femera and Ovidrel injections, and so of course when you're in fertility, you're pregnant like 4 weeks in, which a lot of
Oh,
people don't.
exactly. Yep.
And so we were there at the scan, and I turned to my husband and I was like, "Hey, you were worried it was twins. Good thing it's not." And the tech goes, well, and it was twins, and there was a baby, and we thought for, gosh, I'm losing the numbers now because it's been a minute, but I
Yeah.
think 4 weeks or so, we thought we were having twins, and it was a boy because we did the blood test. My second born is a girl, and there, the maternal fetal medicine doctor, who I'd never met in my life, came in, and he was so upset that I wasn't sobbing, and I was like, "I will cut you." I had to find the time. I'm like, "Sir, I'm a therapist and I will deal with this when the time is right. I'm not going to cry in front of you right now. I can't even process it." So again, those kind of people having I literally, and I told my OB, who is heaven, if I could just fly back to Kansas every year, I think I want to do that because my PCP is amazing too. But um, And also too, those conversations, because we sometimes when our two are driving us right up the wall, we'll be like, hey, thank goodness we don't have more. But then there's that grief, and then you feel like a piece of poo because you had a
Exactly.
son in your uterus, you got pictures of him, like, is he
Exactly.
not special?
Yeah.
Like, it's a very hard thing to sit with, which we could literally talk about that for a whole
Oh,
losing a twin whole episode.
totally, totally. And especially, I mean, as we've said, like it's these completely opposing emotions just sitting right beside each other. And so it's like, oh, can I not have grief because I should be happy? Can I not be happy because I should be sad? It's like, oh my gosh. But oh, I can't believe anyone like pushing what you should. Like I hate the word should. I
Good. Don't shit
hate
on
the word
yourself.
should. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Because like you should just be you. There's
Yeah.
the word there, but like be you.
Yes.
Like what feels right to you? What makes sense to you? How do you want to process this? Like how do you want to reconcile this? Like go talk to your therapist, like whatever works
Yes.
for you, but like
That's why I
you
have
don't
a therapist.
have
I'm
to
literally talking
cry.
to my therapist
Like
after this.
exactly.
Not because of this, but it happened to be the timing.
Yeah. But
Yeah, and I did, and
yeah.
I was very intentional. I left and I sent a message to my boss and was like, hey, this wasn't, because I think it was 11 weeks in. I was like, this isn't how I was going to tell you I was pregnant, but I just found out I lost one of my babies and I'm going home and I need you to cancel my 10 o'clock and I will not be seeing you. And then some friends from Michigan and Texas sent me a care basket through one of those Instacart things. And my boss came over with some tea and lotions and like I knew how I wanted to deal with it. So yeah, I
Yeah,
also encourage that too of like, if that's not how you want to deal with it, do what's most authentic to you, and understanding that humans are allowed to, or no, excuse me, not allowed, capable of holding many emotions at once. We're
totally.
capable of being overjoyed for the healthy heartbeat and terrified because you lost that one and two others before, and
Yeah,
grieving the loss of the baby, and excited because how in the world was I going to pay for 3 kids? I would have to stop working and I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. Like, I can do all those things at once because I'm
exactly.
human and we're
Exactly. And
magic.
I just love that. I just love that as to like it is so true that like all of that can live in the same space.
Yeah. I
Um,
really appreciate you sharing that story because I just, again, I'm always trying to really
yeah.
validate where people are coming from. And the more
Yeah.
people, it's not like a misery loves company kind of thing, but it's not just you and we're here for you and all of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And one thing from like a health like this just popped in as we're talking about like healthcare providers and some like not appropriate bedside manner.
Mhm.
I guess I've always like been like, okay, I'm like at the hospital or, I haven't spent much time in hospitals, but like giving birth and things like that, or at like the doctors. And like, I've always had like a little bit of reverence in that regard, or like, okay, whatever you tell me, like can't
Yep.
mess up the system. You can ask to not have a provider see you again.
I did. I
I have a
did.
friend, I have a friend who had an awful labor, like post labor and delivery, like maternity ward experience.
Mhm.
And like the nurse refused to take her daughter to the nursery. And she's a solo mom. Like
Uh-huh.
it was like, what is going on? And so I didn't realize this. And I'm so happy that she shared this because, you can ask for that nurse not to be assigned to you again. You
Mhm.
can ask for a different doctor,
Yes,
who cares if it's the same practice? Like, you have to take
absolutely
care of
can.
you. And the fact is, like, just because these people have a medical degree doesn't mean that they're the right fit for you. Like, just like finding a therapist is so important to like find somebody who like matches your energy and like, and is helpful for you. It's like very similar from a medical side that I don't think I had actually like connected in that regard before my friend shared this story as well. And so that's another thing I want to share here of like, please, everyone, like feel empowered to say, I would like to see someone else
Yes.
because you deserve the best and the support and not to be, made to feel, not that anybody can make you feel anything, but, not to be like put in a corner or felt like you have to deal with this uncomfortable
Yeah.
situation when you're already going through so much when it comes to fertility stuff. So
Yes.
take the
Yes.
reins.
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. People can't make you, but people certainly do try to make you feel a certain way. So,
Yeah. Yep.
oh my gosh, Lindsay, thank you so much for this. What, first of all, just a joy because I'm like, Lindsay, oh, she's so great, but I don't really know her. Now I feel like, especially after texting this morning, I'm like, we are now very good friends. I feel
I
so
know.
seen.
That's for sure. That's for
And another
sure.
football season awaits us, so it's just great in the fall. And but thank you so much for sharing because a lot, even I started the conversation by saying single parent. So like,
Oh,
and
well, no, but some people like being like that word.
and
So
some
like
people
it's
find
just
that
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
all up to you, absolutely. But so I'm curious if do you have anywhere like people can find you, or any things that you'd like for me to put in the show notes where people like where we can send people that you feel like you want to point people in the direction?
Oh, totally. So I mentioned like if folks are interested, I did mention, Single Greatest Choice is just like such an amazing, amazing resource. And if folks are interested in learning more about the donor conceived industry, like not donor conceived, but sorry, that is like very no, because like donor conceived individuals are people. And so,
Yes.
but
Yes.
about like reproductive rights and donor,
Yes.
industry, donor gamete industry, like those kind of things. I'll share some resources with you for the show notes as well.
Great.
We mentioned social media. I am private on social
Yes.
media, but I
Great.
am,
Love that.
if anyone is interested in connecting though, I am like more than happy to. So if anybody reaches out to you, Meg, like
Yes.
please do send them my way.
Please do
More
send
than
me a
happy in that
DM.
regard. But I do post a lot of pictures of my daughter. I like have such joy in that regard. It's like my little,
Yes.
kind of like track of like our history together. And so
Yeah.
I do just, I don't share that publicly, but I would be more
I
than
get it.
happy to connect with anybody who is, interested in this path.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, again, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for taking your time to share your emotional and intellectual labor for all of us to be able to come alongside you on this journey for a little while.
Of course.
And
Yes.
listener, thank you so much for being here. Remember, be curious, not judgmental, and we will see you next time.